So we're now 1 month away from the start of NBA training camp. And while Damian Lillard still hasn't been traded and James Harden is actively beefing with the Philadelphia 76ers, we do have the reemergence of Ben Simmons coming up prior to the 2023 season. Ben Simmons was talking with Mark Spears of Anscaped, and Simmons talked about how if the version he's at now played against the version of himself from last year, he would kill that version of himself. Ben Simmons thinks that he is back to a top of the NBA level player, and we'll see what happens with Simmons. Obviously, he's still got 2 years left on his contract with Brooklyn. Back injuries kept him out of the 2022 season, and then last year he was limited in play a lot of times, averaged less than 10 points a game. So Juju, with all the questions about Ben Simmons' mental health and his physical health and everything that happened with his exit in Philadelphia, what do you think about the Ben Simmons rebound for this season?
Well, the interesting thing is you mentioned the back injury, and I remember the reporting along that was the back injury was largely mental, or his mental health had a large role in that back injury. To what effect was it limiting? Because, dealing with back soreness, it's one of the trickier injuries in sports, especially like if you're an NBA player who spends a lot of his time in the post, like a Ben Simmons. I can understand how that could be limiting. It was interesting to watch last year with the Brooklyn Nets. With Jacques Vaughn, just at points, he couldn't even play the guy. He just didn't have a specific role on the Nets offense, even when the Nets were even starting to get, I wouldn't say good, but they were starting to get frisky after they had to move off of Harden, Kyrie, KD. They made all the trades that they made. And put that team together that they had towards the end of last season. They were a feisty team, but it was largely with Ben Simmons not playing for them, And when I think about some of the monster stat lines that he used to be able to put up, he used to be a nightmare for teams, and we haven't seen that version in a very long time. And I question whether or not that guy is still in there. I just don't know if that window has officially closed on him.
I don't know what we're going to see from Ben Simmons going forward. I'm very curious about his career in general because Ben Simmons is one of those players who has been accused of not liking basketball as if it's this great sin of the sport that you don't like basketball, despite the fact that Ben Simmons is, again, the son of a former basketball player and basketball coach. Number 1 pick in the NBA draft, who from the age of 15, people identified this person is going to be a basketball star and being pushed in that direction from a young age, and then reaching the NBA and realizing that maybe playing basketball isn't the thing that he wants to do with his life, but it's the thing that he's been directed towards his entire life. And then everything that happened in Philadelphia ended up being a giant mental minefield to work through, beyond the shooting problems, beyond not wanting to be made fun of for his shooting problems, which is a thing that's pretty publicly clear at this point, is that Ben Simmons stopped shooting because he was tired of people making fun of him for not shooting. And then they lose the playoff series to Atlanta, and he decides he's never going back to Philadelphia at that point. And Philadelphia makes public enemy number 1. We all know the story up to this point with Ben Simmons, and I've always been so fascinated by it. I just don't know where it goes next for Ben Simmons here, because all the expectations are gone, right? It's been 2 full seasons since he was supposed to be the second best player on the number 1 seed in the East. It's been 2 seasons since the I'm not coming back to Philadelphia and Daryl Morey trading him for James Harden. All of that is a distant memory at this point. Maybe people are still holding on to it from a fan standpoint, but from a player standpoint, from a league executive and league media standpoint, I don't think that's the reputation Ben Simmons has anymore. I think that's all forgotten at this point by 1, a full season of not playing, and 2, a season of being relatively obscure and out of the limelight, essentially. I mean, like you said, Ben Simmons was coming off the bench a lot of the year last year for Brooklyn. After they traded after everything that happened with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, people weren't talking about Ben Simmons on the Brooklyn Nets. And then when Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant got traded, nobody was talking about the Brooklyn Nets for any reason, because nobody cared about the Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Ben Simmons Brooklyn Nets the back end of the season. So I think the reputation of old for Ben Simmons is a distant memory now, and I think that opens up a blank slate for Ben Simmons to build the second half of his career that he wants to build.
Was it disappointing, though, that he didn't capitalize on the fact that he was shielded in many ways when he was on that Brooklyn Nets team with KD and Kyrie? The focus wasn't really on Simmons. Like a lot of people, whenever that trade happened for Harden, people thought that the Nets might actually be better for it because some of the strengths of Simmons were his defensive capabilities back in the day, but maybe the back injury, if, to what extent that was limiting for him on the defensive end of the basketball, hurt him. But, in many ways, I think people thought that it would have been a good opportunity just because the focus wasn't on him. We know just how much of the vitriol like Kyrie and KD absorb in themselves. And with Simmons also there, obviously they were one of the more hated teams in the league, but the focus wasn't on him like it was in Philly or in that weird offseason in Philly where he was not playing too. Like people weren't really talking about Simmons as much as they were talking about KD and Kyrie.
Remember when 2 years ago it was the end of Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. They lost to the Celtics in the first round when they were the 7th seed. And the conversation all these years is they score more points than anyone in the history of the league, and they can't play defense, right? That was the thing everyone said about Brooklyn is like they are awful at defense, but they score a ton of points. When they traded for Ben Simmons, they were like, this fits exactly what they need. They need a defensive-minded player who can play defense on the perimeter and give them more balance. The thing is now Brooklyn's roster construction is we play incredible top-of-the-league defense and can't score for shit. That's what happened. They turned over their roster completely, and now it's Nick Claxton, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, 3 of the best defensive players in the NBA who can't score at the levels of the competition that they play. Mikal Bridges can give you points. He can't give you points the same way that Luka Doncic can give you points. He can't give you points the same way that Jason Tatum can give you points. So what does Mikal Bridges bring to the table? Really good defense. Cam Johnson, really, really good defense. And he works best as a spot-up shooter. Because I remember in that playoff series, they were playing the Sixers. Cam Johnson was averaging 24 points a game. He had a 30-point playoff game last year. People forget Cam Johnson had a 30-point playoff game last year. And they got swept by Philadelphia. Because the best path forward is not Cam Johnson scoring 25 points a game. He's not efficient enough as a scorer to put that forward. So, ironically, Brooklyn is now a team that has 4 players who play really good defense, but also aren't top of the league scorers. I don't really think they have a top of the league scorer on their team between Claxton, Bridges, Cam Johnson, and Ben Simmons, who are, I would argue, their core 4 players right now. You could argue Dinwiddie is also in that group, but I would say Claxton, Bridges, Johnson, and Ben Simmons are their core 4 players. None of those guys are really great offensive threats. So they kind of just have a multiplicity of the same skill set now, which wasn't the case 2 years ago.
So if you're Jacques Vaughn, do you trust this guy to throw him out there in key spots to be an everyday starter for you, part of your core group of guys? Like, how do you treat Ben Simmons this year if you're assuming he's part of the team the entire season?
I don't think you make Ben Simmons the primary ball handler on the team, which is something that Ben Simmons has been in pretty much every place that he's been so far. So they have 2 point forwards, right? So they have Mikal Bridges and they have Ben Simmons, both guys who handle the ball coming up the floor at times, both of them who work well as distributors and aren't necessarily the first option you would turn to create your own shot, right? So they have 2 point forwards on the team. And I would suspect their best path forward is with Mikal Bridges, because I would assume Mikal Bridges is a better basketball player as of now than Ben Simmons. But that's kind of crazy to say compared to 2 years ago, right? Mikal Bridges was the 4th best player on a team that came within 2 games of winning the championship in the Phoenix Suns. And Ben Simmons was an all NBA defensive player who had made multiple all-star games and was worth a max contract, right? At this stage, I think it's safe. I mean, I'm not saying 100% sure, but I feel like Mikal Bridges is a better basketball player than Ben Simmons. I don't think either of them are all-stars at this stage of their career, so I think it's kind of semantics here. Brooklyn's just working with what they have, and personally, I think Brooklyn's had that play in 9, 10, 11 territory in the Eastern Conference this year.
That was about to be my next question. Like, where do you see Brooklyn right now with this team composition?
I can name you 7 teams that I know for sure are better than Brooklyn, because even people were like, oh, Brooklyn made the playoffs at the end of last season after trading KD and Kyrie. They had a sub 500 record after trading Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and then got swept out of the playoffs by the Philadelphia 76ers. This was not a team that was lighting up the league after the trade. They were just not tanking. That was the thing that was clear when they traded for Kevin Durant. They are not tanking. They're going to retool this thing on the fly, basically. I can say that Boston, Miami, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Cleveland, the Knicks, and Atlanta are all better than Brooklyn. So that leaves Brooklyn kind of in that like 8 to 12 territory. Cause I mean, Orlando is an interesting case, but besides Orlando, I would say Charlotte is not going to be as good as the Toronto Raptors. Is it fair to say might be in that group as well as like 8 to 12 at this point?
The Bulls, I mean, they still got DeMar there for what it's worth. Yeah. I mean, Zach LaVine, we're talking the play-in territory, right? Like, I feel like the Bulls have more firepower, certainly offensively. Now we know they can't stop anyone defensively, but that's kind of the opposite effect that, again, you have with Brooklyn, where they're defensive minded, but no offense.
Yeah. I even like Indiana about as much as I like Brooklyn at this point with Tyrese Halliburton and Benedict Mathurin as the 1-2 there.
Now, if I told you that Ben Simmons could return to form, could be Philadelphia Ben Simmons, does that at all change how you look at this Brooklyn Nets team?
Brooklyn is, we mentioned the core 4 players on the team before. It's Nick Claxton, it's Mikal Bridges, it's Cam Johnson, and it's Ben Simmons. Again, no disrespect to Dinwiddie. I know Dinwiddie's still there. I'm just putting him on the other side of this list here. So of those 4 players, I would assume Brooklyn's going to trade one of them at some point here. I don't know which one it's going to be because Cam Johnson has 1 year left on his deal. Or maybe Cam Johnson. I think Cam Johnson signed an extension this offseason. So I think he's got 4 years, $100 million now with Brooklyn added on to the last year of his deal. Bridges is under contract. Claxton's under contract. Simmons has 2 years left on his deal. So if I were to pick one of them that would be most likely as a trade candidate, I would assume it would be Simmons. But if you tell me Ben Simmons can play all NBA defense again and give you 6 assists a game and is back in the starting lineup, then maybe we have a second thought about this. But I think they're in a tough position because all of these players, one, are not good enough to be the best player on a team that's actually competitive in the NBA, and 2, have very repetitive skill sets if they're going to be your 2, 3, and 4 best players on the team. So I guess Ben Simmons is the one I would point to and say is most likely to be traded, but no one's trading for that contract as of right now.
So yeah, that's the next question there is like, what is kind of the trade value of Ben Simmons? Like, who's trading for him? What are you trading? I know you have to match that contract too, which is a whole other Pandora's box of issues when it comes to moving off a guy like Simmons. Is he a guy that can still carry at least, I don't know, a first round pick? Is he just a pick swap? Is he just a couple of role players and you call it a day?
I think it depends on when you trade him. Because like the last time Ben Simmons was traded, which was the trade deadline 2 years ago, he had 3.5 years left on that contract. And even last year when Brooklyn was tearing that shit to the ground, he still had 3 years and $110 million left on that contract. So no one was really chomping at the bit to trade for Ben Simmons. But I think if it's the trade deadline this year, he's got 1.5 years, $50 million. If it really doesn't work out, you can buy him out at the end of 1 year. Teams are really only trading for 1 year of Ben Simmons at this point. 1 year and 2 playoff runs are essentially what they're looking at. It's 1 year and 2 playoff runs for Ben Simmons. So I would say it's more likely that he's tradable this year. And if Ben Simmons looks a halfway decent NBA player, there's a team that will trade for him at that contract. I just think what you're going to see is probably a player swap more than it is a draft pick swap. So it would be like Brooklyn trading for a player that better complements what they're doing in their system. I'll use the Sacramento Kings as an example because I want the Sacramento Kings to trade for Ben Simmons. I would like that to be a thing that happens. If the Sacramento Kings offered up Kevin Huerter and Harrison Barnes for Ben Simmons and pick a player on Brooklyn's bench who's like relatively young. Maybe even Dinwiddie. I know he's got a larger contract, but just throw in another player who's on Brooklyn. If you make that as the straight up swap, I think that's more probable than any draft picks changing hands. Because I think instead of trading Ben Simmons as an asset, you're trading Ben Simmons for a player that better fits the team that Brooklyn's trying to build. Because like we said, Claxton, Bridges, Johnson, Simmons, they're very similar in terms of where they stand in the NBA right now. And all of them play pretty good defense, but shouldn't be your number one or even number two scoring option. Maybe Bridges could be a number two scoring option, but it's not ideal if they're all your number one scoring option.
All right, guys. Well, what do you think? Does Ben Simmons have anything left in the tank? Can he elevate the Brooklyn Nets this season? Where do the Brooklyn Nets fall in the Eastern Conference? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to our channel, follow us on all our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.